title of this session is The Struggle for Liberty, a Different Perspective with moderator Larry Sharp. Please silence all your cell phones for this session, and there will be a brief Q&A at the end. I will be up front over here with the microphone, and when you ask a question, please be sure to speak directly into the microphone. Thank you.
Please have a seat, guys, please. Please have a seat. I am very happy that you all joined me. Thank you for your patience. This is a session on liberty. That's what it's really about. And let me see if I can grab my papers here, showing that I am actually just a human being. And I want to make sure I have everything ready. Yes, I am very lucky that I have with me three people who I'm very happy to be on the stage here. The one and only Daniel Martino. How are you, sir? Amala Ekpunobi.
Yep. Hi.
And the man you've seen on TV 4,000 times, John McWhorter. So I'd like to give each of you just about a minute or so to kind of tell everybody who you are. And then I'm going to ask some pointed questions and see where they stand on it. Once we're done with those, if there's some time, we'll have some questions here from the audience. So if we can start, Daniel, please. About a minute.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. As you heard, my name is Daniel Martino. I'm originally from Venezuela. I was born and raised there, came to the United States 5 years ago. Venezuela, as you know, is a country that has been totally obliterated by a socialist regime that has been in power since 1 month after I was born, actually. From having a childhood where my parents made what most Americans make, a few $1,000s a month, to just making $2 a day in the year 2016 when I left. That was all because of the hyperinflation, because of the price controls that made us do lines for basic necessities, outages of water that lasted weeks straight, and we had to collect water from the rain to supply our home, and of course, blackouts that happen all the time, and terrible crime. Caracas, the city I'm from, actually has the highest murder rate on the planet. Every year, between 20 and 30,000 people are murdered in Venezuela. That means that over the last 20 years, more people have died in Venezuela out of just homicide, not starvation, not lack of medicines, just homicide, than in battle during the Iraq War. That is the disaster, the silent war that is going on in my country, and why 6 million of us have fled in the last 5 years, out of a population of 30 million. So that really shaped my experiences, and that really made me believe in freedom, really made me want to come to the United States. I obtained a Fulbright scholarship to study in Indiana University in Indianapolis. I graduated with a BA in economics in December 2019, moved to Kentucky for work, and now I'm doing a PhD in economics at Columbia in New York, about to move next weekend. And just honestly blessed for the opportunity and working so what we don't ever feel the same disaster that we felt in Venezuela, and that we can give freedom for everybody in the world, right? Because nobody deserves to go through the destruction that your country and your society and your family feel through when socialist policies are implemented. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, thank you. Amala, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amala Ekpunobi. I am the newest personality at PragerU, and my story kind of started when I was very young. I was raised by a single mother of 3 who happens to be a very dedicated leftist and works for the left as a fundraiser and developer. So I was raised with that influence from a very young age, and I was an angry leftist through most of my young life.
His first book published.
Hold on 1 second. Can we fix that audio? Excellent. Thank you. Please keep going.
There we go. Thank you. So yes, I was raised as a leftist for most of my life. When I was 17 years old and I graduated from high school, I actually began working for the left at the very same organization that my mother was working at as a youth organizer, which meant that I was traveling around to different high schools and middle schools and indoctrinating young people, funneling them through the organization and creating young activists. So through that work, I realized that I was not doing something that was right, which is a longer story. I left the left, became a conservative, and about 1.5 years later began making videos on the internet, which sort of blew up and led me to PragerU. So now I'm here.
I'm going to remain seated because I'm used to chairs. I'm an armchair person, and when I stand, I feel exposed. But I teach linguistics at Columbia University, and they also make me teach some other things now and then. And I genuinely love that, but as the years have gone by, and it's getting to the point that they have, I have found myself called upon to defend Black America's sense of self, and perhaps to prevent Black America from having a sense of itself as an immigrant subnation, as opposed to
It had lots of
American people who are, I wonder who those other people are, as opposed to people in an alien land. And so I think that it's gotten to the point that many people may know me better through my conversations online with Glenn Lowry and some of my books about race. And I'm glad that they do, but the truth is what I wake up thinking about in the morning is geeky language things that I talk about in great courses and at TED, and listening to things like the way languages mix together as they are now as I'm speaking, and there's this God up here saying
The reason that
things.
God gave us two.
But my main goal is to help Black Americans feel whole rather than having Black Americans develop a notion that the way that we feel significant is in creating a manufactured sense of victimhood, which ultimately is more other people feel and don't feel about us than how we feel about ourselves and what we want to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So I hear often when I talk to people on the left, I live in New York City, so many of my friends are Democrats or progressives, and people on the right, a difference in how they see what liberty or freedom is. Often they'll say things like, well, Larry, you don't understand. Freedom isn't freedom to do something. Freedom is freedom from something, right? So we have to have freedom from stuff and freedom to do stuff, both of those things. And they will often fight back and forth and decide which is right and when you can use force and when you can't, and what is right and what is wrong. And I guess my question for you guys is, do Americans actually know what liberty is? Does that word have an actual value or meaning that we can all agree upon? Or no? Is it something that we're just going to be struggling to even define?
I'm not aggressive on panels, but before you two say more interesting things, I want to jump in and say that it is a chance issue that in English and in Western European languages, there's one word that means both freedom from and freedom to. That is such a lexicographical mess because they're completely different concepts. And then when you bring in what a right is, really, all three of those things should have different words put to them. And it means that we're often confused in what freedom means.
Very nice.
Well, I will say that the Venezuelan Constitution of 1999 guarantees us every kind of right. The right to housing, the right to healthcare, the right to food, the right to having electricity. And just because you put something on paper doesn't mean it actually is. And with freedom, it's the same thing. But I think that with freedom, we've actually won the battle with that word. We don't see the left using freedom nowadays, at least. I think that we don't see the left using freedom to justify Medicare for all or to justify big government. They use equality. They use fairness. And I think that that's where the battle is. I think that we've actually been successful at claiming the word freedom, and I like that. But I wish that also the left was also supportive of just our basic freedoms, right? Not just their big government programs, but that's what I think.
I think we all,
What the good bands are.
My goodness, okay. I think we all understand what liberty means and what freedom means. I think where the great divide happens in this country is not understanding that we do have liberty and freedom here in America. And that was a struggle that I faced in my journey of being an American citizen, knowing that I had every right and every freedom to pursue what I thought would make me happy, what I thought my own pursuit of happiness would be, but I had all these external forces telling me that I was oppressed, telling me that I didn't have liberty, and telling me that a white man had more than I did. And that shaped my worldview more so than my perception of what liberty meant or what freedom meant.
Okay. So, but then I'm still not sure if the question was actually answered. Right? To your point, you're saying the right kind of has the word liberty or freedom. But then when I say liberty, does someone automatically think, oh, you must be a conservative, or oh, you must be a Republican, and liberty is only for Republicans, liberty is only for conservatives, right? And to your point, then, does that mean, well, then if liberty is for Republicans and conservatives, that means equality or fairness is for Democrats or for progressives? Have we broken our country up with the word as simple as liberty?
Look, liberty leads to inequality. The problem is that we have a group of people in this country who are teaching others that inequality is a bad thing. Inequality is not a bad thing in and of itself. Inequality can be a bad thing if it comes from unfair circumstances where somebody is actually oppressing somebody else or taking away their freedom. But if two people have just different preferences, different interests, then they're going to achieve different outcomes, and that's a good thing. You know, we're all different. We would be in a very boring world if we were all the same, if we all had the same taste, the same preferences. So I think that inequality is not we need to fight that notion that inequality is a bad thing. We need to understand that actually inequality is fair. It is a good thing that people who give different amounts of effort, that people who chase different dreams, that a doctor makes more than somebody who does not have a degree in medicine, that's a fair thing, and that's good for society. In Venezuela, I remember as a young kid watching the Minister of Industry saying on national TV that it's not fair for a physician to make more than somebody who cleans the street. Not even this was on Venezuelan regime television, not even the television interviewer who was a leftist could believe the words that were coming out of the mouth of the minister, and asked him, well, don't you think there's some educational qualification consideration there? And he's like, no, people who clean the street take care of your health. Physicians just fix your health. They're the same. For some people, everybody should be the same. We need to fight that.
Got it, okay. But isn't there a point, though? Thank you, yes. But isn't there a cultural piece, right? And John, I'm sure you're going to jump on me on this one. The denotative meaning versus the connotative meaning, right? Denotatively, you're correct, right? What you're saying is correct. But man is not, that does not feel good, right? Because we have a culture, if it was unequal, then it was less than. That's what our culture has told us. If you're not equal to me, then you're less than. So inequality is bad, culturally, emotionally. It's bad because if it's not equal, then clearly you're worse off than me or less than me in some way, shape, or form. Amala, you mentioned that, right? You said you felt like, well, because I was black and I was different, that the white guy had something better than me. I think there's an emotional piece. John, am I wrong here?
No, you're not wrong. I think that what we're touching upon is that it is not as natural to all human beings in the world to cherish the sense that there is an accomplishment in being highly educated and being trained to do something that isn't natural, that you wouldn't learn under normal conditions. This is a little bit of Rousseau. There's the idea that we would have been better, not as the noble savage, that's not what he said, but that we would be better as bands of about 300 or 400 people living by a river. Think of most cultures in New Guinea. For him, that's where it should have stopped, where the closest thing to inequality is that one person is the chief, but that only happened vaguely, and there are times when he's not really, and it's usually a he, is not really the chief. The idea that there is a such thing as justified inequality is probably something that comes from either despotism, where people are miserable, or perhaps a more refined version of it is post-Enlightenment. But even that way of thinking is under threat these days. And so that's where I think, Daniel, you get this person who says that the street sweeper and the neurosurgeon should make the same kind of salary. The idea that the neurosurgeon did something that means that the neurosurgeon should get more coconuts. I don't know if all people think that way. It's a lesson that the world needs to learn. It's a tough one to teach.
Good. Amala, anything on this?
It's always easy to compare yourself to other people, and it's easy to think that because we all live in this society together, we should all benefit from the same amount of equity as the other person next to us. And that's not the case. That's not how it works. Humans naturally place themselves into hierarchies. There will always be somebody who accomplishes more than you do, or strives harder than you do, or is more ambitious than you are. And to think that because somebody does that, you need to be gifted or reap the benefits of what they've sown is a completely ridiculous way to think. But it's so easy to sell that to people, especially on the left, when you can look at somebody else's life and compare yourself to them and think, I should have what they have.
Amala, what taught you that? How come you can see that and so many people your age can't? What happened to you?
Working for the left happened to me. I tell anybody who believes in leftist ideology, go and work for a leftist organization, give it 6 months, and then come back to me and see how you feel, because you will begin to question everything you've ever thought. And when that happened to me, it wasn't a sense of betrayal from the left, really, although that is what happened. It was a sense of relief, just knowing, wow, I actually do have freedom in this country. Wow, I'm not oppressed. And it amazes me that there is a whole side of this country that wants to sell that to people.
It's a good point. So how do you then square that with someone who would say, yeah, I got it. I should go out and be a doctor or get educated or work, but the system is against me, right? My parents were put in prison with the war on drugs, or my mom was stuck in the war on poverty, or one of these things happened to me and it was the system that got me, right? It was redlining, so my parents, my veteran grandfather who came back from World War II couldn't get the loan and couldn't get the house, right? What happens when someone says, but it's the system, right? It isn't me. I want to go do these cool things, but the system is keeping me down. How do you respond to that? And can you at least see where they would be like, yeah, it's kind of tough? Please, go ahead.
Yeah, well, in many cases, I do think that it's the system, and it's true that there are laws that do affect people, and there are unfair laws, and there are unfair circumstances, and there is not equality of opportunity, and there will never be equality of opportunity, by the way. That's a false notion that we are trying to promote. If somebody has parents with more money, they're going to have more opportunities than parents with less money, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The goal that we should have is for everybody to have more opportunities, right? And especially those who have the least. But when somebody is perhaps just angry or sad or resentful at others, I think that's the emotion, resentment at others because they didn't have the same opportunities that they had. I think that that's a feeling that it's true, but that's not going to change anything. And it also wouldn't be fair to take opportunities away from others. We need to change the circumstances, I agree, but negative emotions, negative feelings are never going to be the solution.
Okay.
I also think that view of blaming the system is a product of culture. It's not necessarily something that you can point to that is empirical here in America. I came from a family, my father's a Nigerian immigrant, and if you look into the stats on people who immigrate here from Africa, they are way different than native-born Black Americans in the way that they go about being in this society, the way that they are treated by police officers, and their view of America and the systemic oppression that a lot of native Black Americans hold on to here in this country. And I think the same can be said, look at Daniel. He came from Venezuela, a city with the highest murder rate, and he's here, he's successful, he's going to Colombia in 1 week. So there's plenty of examples to point to when people tell me, well, the system is holding me down, of people that have been able to surpass that and build very, very successful careers and lives. So I think that is a cultural mindset rather than a reality.
We are fish that don't know we're wet on that, because many people would watch this and say, how can you not think about these systemic inequalities? They're real. And they are. And I think that if we could listen in on a conversation people were having about society in 1912, we would miss a wider understanding of these sorts of things. We have advanced in thinking about it. The idea, though, that you think more about the obstacles than about how you get over them, and that being a mainstream sentiment that's cherished by most intellectuals and artists, that's new. And it's at the point where you have to be elderly, or even beyond elderly, to remember another time, because it's been that way since roughly about 1966, the year that everything changed, I always say. But yeah, of course there are obstacles. The ordinary person throughout the history of the species is interested in showing how they can triumph over something that, frankly, they find, whether it's justified or not, rather embarrassing. I always think of something this is going to sound so pretentious, but it really is a useful example, especially because I think I'm going to get the director's name wrong because it's been a while. There is a film. It's one of these neo-realist, boring Italian films that you get in film school from the 40s. I think it's early 50s. It's called shoe shine, basically. And you're watching these people shining shoes. I don't even need to tell you the rest of it. They're shoe shiners, they're Italian, it's in black and white. They're miserable people. Shoe Shine, I think, is by Rossellini, I'm pretty sure. And it was a scandal in Italy because people who actually lived that life didn't like seeing it depicted on the screen. They lived that life, but they didn't like the idea that that was their essence in some way. They didn't think of it as cool or authentic. They liked the idea that they could do better than that, even if they weren't going to. That was normal. It wasn't that working class Italians were somehow heroic, that there's something about pasta or something like that. That was normal. Whereas today, if you did a shoe shine film about poor shoe shiners who were black in Chicago, the idea would be, yes, you're telling the truth, that's the way it should be. And if you show a black upper middle class outside of a sitcom, then you have some explaining to do. That's unnatural, that cherishing of the victimization complex. It's one of the most interesting things about modernity. I wish people would talk about it more. It needs to be reified.
So let's walk down that exact road if we could for a second. I live in New York City. Many Jamaican immigrants come to New York City. Many Nigerian immigrants come to New York City. And I know many of them. And when they talk to just me, they very often tell a different story about, to your point, native African Americans. They don't have a very positive outlook, if that makes any sense. And some of you knows that what I'm talking about. They don't have a very positive outlook. They will often say things that are negative about them, that kind of thing. And the reverse is also true. You will find native African Americans often tease Nigerian immigrants, often tease Jamaican immigrants on, you guys think you're hardworking, you're so conservative. They'll tease them often in this. There'll be a ribbing back and forth.
That In Living Color skit, remember?
Yes, absolutely, yes. We're giving away our age. So yes, yes, absolutely, correct. They weren't born yet. They weren't born yet, yes.
It was a television show about black people.
Yeah. Television is something you watch that's not the internet. Just so you know what television is. Sorry, yes. So absolutely. So, is there a tension there? Do they get it? Or is either side unfair? Right? Is either criticism unfair? Right? And this probably affects you. I mean, you're both, you have your foot in both.
Right. This is the bane of my existence is probably this question, because when I became a conservative out on the internet, I got a lot of pushback, and the strongest pushback I got was actually from the native-born black community, even though I am a native-born black American. I even got into this whole viral argument of a man who coined a term called foundational black American. And foundational black American means that you are a black person in America who is a descendant of slaves. And I've been told time and time again that I cannot speak on black issues here in America because my father is Nigerian, because I'm not a foundational black American. I have no right to speak about black culture. I have no right to speak about issues that face black people. So I think there is a lot of hatred on the native-born black American side for immigrants, and I think the same can be said for immigrants towards native black Americans, because we come here to build successful lives, and oftentimes we do so, but all of the problems that the black community is facing right now, the fatherlessness, the victimhood mentality, is seeping into the culture with immigrants in this country as well.
But doesn't it feel like, and let me push back, doesn't it feel like the immigrant community is in some way talking down or saying that they're not good enough? Isn't that the emotion that comes across? Because I felt it on both sides also, right? I felt it. My mother's an immigrant. So I felt both of those sides. And part of me feels when I hear you native-born African Americans don't do as well, it's almost like, you're putting me down too? I thought you're one of us. So then there's you're one of them. I feel like that's almost a backlash. Am I wrong on this? Oops, I apologize so much. I kept my phone. I'm sorry. I apologize so much. Mine is next. Yes. No.
It's interesting because I haven't had that experience personally. I think where I get the most pushback is that I am a conservative, and I'm telling the black community in America that you can be successful, that you're not victims, and that's a hard thing to reconcile, especially when you've been told that your entire life. Mm-hmm. It was a hard thing to reconcile when I went through that experience. So I try to do so in a very, very kind manner, or as kindly as I can. So I hope that I don't come off as being somebody who's looking down upon the black community, because I was there. I shared that same mindset.
I will say almost all of my family are immigrants, really. My grandparents immigrated to Venezuela in the 1950s from Spain and Italy. In Spain, they were under a fascist dictatorship under Franco. My grandparents were very poor in a rural community in northwestern Spain. And my grandfather specifically, he was an orphan. His dad died in the Spanish Civil War, and he immigrated at 17 to Venezuela himself. He didn't even finish elementary school. The same was my four grandparents. And in Venezuela, they built a life, became middle-class families. My parents were able to go to college. And now my parents left, and now they're not in Venezuela either, and now I'm in the United States. So at the end, it's like a story of just escaping different countries. So it's so interesting, the story of immigration and success, because it's something that people don't talk about when we talk about the issue of immigration, is that immigrants are really self-selected populations of their home countries. Not all the siblings of my grandfather left Spain. He was the only one. Why? Because he was the oldest, and he was perhaps the most ready to work and send remittances to his family. So it's really a self-selected group of people. And then in economics, we call this future is contingent on the past, right? And it's true that in the United States, African Americans suffered historical discrimination, were able to accumulate less wealth, and that has a generational effect, that there will be generational inequalities, which can only change if you want to measure it as the racial gap with racial mixing, which hopefully that will, in the future, we'll forget about this thanks to that. But what I'm trying to say with this is that it is true that there are differences between immigrants and native-born blacks, just like there are differences between native-born Hispanics and Hispanic immigrants and Asian immigrants and Asian Americans, right? Because immigrants are self-selected, there has been past discrimination for people who were already here in the country, and that's just a fact. What we should not do with that fact is create hate. We should learn from that fact and try to reduce that lack of opportunity that native-born populations had in the past.
That's nice.
The skit in question, because I think it should be mentioned, In Living Color was a jolly half-hour variety show that was about black issues in the 90s. It ran 5 years. It was very edgy for the time, and one of the skits...
And it launched Jim Carrey.
It's why you know who Jim Carrey is, and it's Damon Wayans to an extent. And, it ran every skit into the ground, but one of the better ones was called Hey Man. And it was this Jamaican family, and they're all doing fake Caribbean accents, but the idea is that they all have multiple jobs, and they think that's the way you live, and whenever the teenage girl brings a boy home, the man asks, how many jobs you got? And that's supposed to be funny. And at the time, that was channeling that idea that the native Black American community has of these immigrants as hardworking to a cartoonish degree. But Larry, this thing that you're talking about, where the immigrants look down on us. I'm native, both sides. The idea that you people haven't done as well. And I remember a Haitian said, "Well, I'll bet your family came over as slaves." And I was thinking, well, where do you think your family came? But this person actually thought that I was a descendant of slaves, and I guess he was a descendant of somebody. But I understand that. To be honest, I've always thought that person was right. And so, for example, Daniel, the idea that immigrants are self-selecting, of course, they are. But often the idea is that the conversation is supposed to stop there. Well, black people in America can't be expected to do that well because they didn't self-select. That, again, is a very modern perspective. What it's supposed to be, and what it was 100 years ago, is if the immigrants can do it despite the racism that they face, then so can we. Why don't we imitate them? There's nothing unnatural about that. It's just the way we've been taught to think since Stokely Carmichael. So, yeah, I frankly listen to those immigrants and I think, yeah, you're right. Now, maybe I feel that way partly because I'm arrogant, but it never hurt my feelings somehow.
Well, it's funny you said that my, this is a personal story that just may sound horrible, but my mother was an immigrant, my father wasn't, and my mother pushed my father. And that's how we got out of the South Bronx. I grew up in the South Bronx. We got out because we worked multiple jobs like the Jamaicans or whatever you want to, right? We did that. We actually played that game in the 70s and the 80s when I grew up. And, well, I grew up in the 70s, but you guys grew up in what, like last week? Anyway, my point is...
I don't like being middle-aged.
my point is, that kind of actually was my family, right? Your point, my mother, being an immigrant, actually pushed my father to work harder and to get us out, and we got to Long Island, which I guess was cool back then. But yes, that's what we did. It's a good point. But let me go to another piece, though, with that. Statistically, people of color tend to, and youngsters also, tend to be more open to socialism, think it's a good idea, back it, more than other parts of America. Is this because there are no other or better ideas that they see, right? I mean, I remember someone told me this many years ago, and I believe it to usually be true. If you want to know what's wrong with America, ask a Democrat. If you want to know what's right with America, ask a Republican. And they're almost always right. The Democrats are right. They're very good at telling you what's wrong with America. Republicans are very good at telling you what's right with America. The problem is then Democrats' answers are almost always bad answers. And Republicans often have no answers. It's good enough, leave it alone. So if you're not in a good spot, right, if you're not in a good spot personally, you will often see Republicans as the party of no answers, because everything's fine, leave it alone, and Democrats, the party of bad answers. So you either check out, or you hold your nose, and you vote Democrat, because they got something. Am I off on this? Is that true, or is socialism something that they really love or want to be, or is it just there's nothing better?
I think it's a matter of language. I think the way that conservatives present themselves is saying that you can make it self-accountability, you're responsible for yourself, and that's how you make success in this world. And then the Democrats say, well, no, there are all these barriers for you, and we're the party that wants to help you with that. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to go to that side, the motherly parent that's going to nurture you into success and give you, get away from all these barriers that are set in front of you. And I think, especially with the Black community. Tom Sowell writes about this in his book, Discrimination and Disparities. He says that success is really not a matter of skin color, it's not a matter of gender, it's a matter of prerequisites. And a lot of those prerequisites are micro ones, like how often your parents read to you, are you going to private school, are you going to public school, are you in a two-parent household? And right now, the native-born Black American community is already operating at a lack of prerequisites with the lack of fathers in the Black community. And that's a major setback. So acknowledging that and saying that this is a barrier for you, which they know, and I think the Black community is feeling that, and we can see that statistically with the success of Black Americans versus white Americans versus Asian Americans, and it's so much easier to fall for the democratic socialist who tells you we're going to take care of that for you.
So you're saying it kind of feels good?
It does.
Okay.
Oh, it feels good, and it feels virtuous to say, not only am I going to go for this party that's going to help me, but I'm going to make change myself. And so many people who are on the left and who are working in social justice like I was feel like they're going to be arbiters of change, and they're going to create a revolution, and they're going to make this world better, and everybody's going to be successful, and everybody's going to be equal, when that's not possible.
But it does feel good.
It does feel great.
Well, there we go. It does feel good. Go ahead. Anything?
Look, it does feel good to say that not only should you have the things that you lack, but it is your right to have those things, right? And it is a problem because I totally agree with you in that the right does not have answers. If you ask anybody in this audience, what is the conservative answer to the problem with higher education, with the high cost of higher education? Nobody knows. But everybody knows the left-wing answer. We have to forgive student loan debt and we have to make college free. Everybody knows that.
Print more money. That's the answer. It
Yes.
always is. Print more money.
Yeah, no problem. Of course, we can
Yes.
just print money and have inflation, right? Like Venezuela.
What could go wrong?
So they have easy answers, very well packaged for marketing, and they are responding to the concerns of the people. And of course, they're going to be more popular. And because it is minority communities that have higher rates of poverty or have these problems, then of course they're going to vote for them in higher degrees. It is very interesting with immigrants because there's this study by the California Public Policy Foundation about whether immigrants in California identify as conservatives, liberals, or moderates. They identify more as conservatives than native Californians, actually, but they vote for the Democrats at a higher degree.
Absolutely.
Why?
Yes, all the time.
A lot of it is marketing. A lot of it is, Republicans are racist. I've had that answer campaigning for Republicans from Black people, from Hispanic people, from everybody, telling them to vote for this council member. But Republicans are racist. Literally, that's the answer.
You are. I wish you were wrong. I mean, look, a lot of my family, conservative, vote Democrat. A lot of my family, they vote Democrat. You're totally right. I know lots of people of color who are conservative and vote Democrat. But, and this is a little bit off topic, but it's going to touch what you're talking about. A lot of people give Trump a whole lot of credit for bringing Black and Hispanic voters over to him. A lot of it isn't his. All Trump did was make it neutral. That's all he did. What actually happened is the left was so aggressive on their culture war that so many of the Black and Hispanics who were already conservative simply decided to not vote Democrat, and they voted Republican. So it's not like Trump or the Republicans made more conservatives. They didn't. What happened is there were people who were already conservative who used to vote Democrat. who said, you know what, I'm done, I'm voting Republican. A lot of that happened, you're totally correct. I know in my own family. My own family, I agree, yes. John, I'm sorry, go ahead. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, I'll just say too that with immigrants, there's this whole other thing with immigration policy, right? That is very, it affects them. I know many people even in Kentucky who, literally, some of them are illegal immigrants, right? Or they're on DACA, and their sibling is a U.S. citizen.
Yep.
Who is their sibling going to vote for? Are they going to vote for lower taxes and smaller government, or are they going to vote for keeping their sister in their home, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's a no-brainer, right?
Absolutely.
There's also something to remember, which is this fish wet thing that I'm trying to get across, which is that a person of color can't vote for somebody who might be a racist to some degree. Most people wouldn't question that today, but nobody would have thought that way if you went back in a time machine to, say, 1950. Imagine a black person voting for Eisenhower. Imagine a black person loving and putting on their wall John F. Kennedy. By our standards today, he was a complete and utter bigot. He was born in another time, and everybody there knew quite well that John F. Kennedy would not have been happy if any of his kids had married any of their kids. Yet the idea was, who is the best for us regardless? It's only after the late 60s that the idea kicks in that if the person doesn't pass a certain bigotry test, then they can't have our vote, even if we believe everything that person believes. That's a trickle-down of the victimization complex. That's what I mean by that's part of our times. It's part of the warp and woof. And it gets us in trouble because we end up not voting for our interests.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I think I have a couple volunteers out here. If anybody here has a question or a comment, we have a volunteer with a microphone. If you put your hand in the air, he will come to you if you have a question for anybody on the panel. So yeah, we have one over there. So while he's getting over there, I want to say thank you guys for some of the details that you came across. I mean, you really brought up some interesting ideas here. It's really amazing. Your question is?
Okay, I don't know if this is much of a question, but it's an observation. When you talk about the Republicans not having an answer, the Democrats having an answer, I think a wonderful example of that has been with health care.
Oh, yes. Perfect example, healthcare, right? If you look at many of the people who are talking, who are the strongest socialist voices, the strongest voices for what people would call the woke culture, or the anti-racists. You ask many of those people, and one of the things they bring up almost always, Medicare for all or healthcare for all. They bring this up as a great equalizer, right? I think to your point, the left's rhetoric in the past has been very good with, we're going to be equal, everyone's going to have this, everyone's going to have that. It's true. So when you ask someone on the right, what do they often say? Free market. They say free market, right? That's what they often say. The free market will fix it. But the average American, when they hear free market, what do they think? They think, I'm still in trouble. I'm still in trouble. Any view on his comment, anybody?
I think the left gets the added benefit of no matter what they put forth as a plan, even if you have so many examples of where it doesn't work. Look at socialism and communism, where we can point to Venezuela, Cuba, China. They get to say, well, it hasn't been done right yet. And so it doesn't matter what sort of intellectual argument you put forth and how many people can give you evidence of it not working. They just get to say, well, we haven't tried it my way yet.
Okay.
I'll say quickly, too, that the dangerous thing about people voting for these individuals who are offering them easy answers is that some of them don't even have good intentions.
Yeah.
There are actual socialists who want to turn this country into Venezuelan government. And people think that some of it's, oh, no, they just want to make us like the Nordic countries. But did you know that during July 4th weekend, there was the group of the Democrats